Friday or at any time that people were in the building. As you may or may not know, many of the churches that I've had a relationship with, their concern has been primarily people coming into the church and robbing the church. This has happened many, many times. That after the offering is collected, somebody who knew the routine of the church would come in with weapons drawn or simply go to where the trustees keep the money that they're going to count after the service and rob the church and escape without anybody knowing sometimes or doing anything about it. And so that was the concern that we had many, many years ago. We do not want our church to be robbed. Now, in some of the churches where there are men and women who are law enforcement officers and they attend a particular church, this is a no-brainer, because these men and women would usually carry their weapons wherever they go, whether it's church, doctor's visit, they carry their weapons. And so many of the people who would consider going into a church to rob a church, they have no knowledge as to who is or who is not a law enforcement representative. But they would protect our churches. There was a pastor, it was hilarious. I would see him drive from his church all the way to Mattapan with two cars tailing his car. He would have some kind of a bag, and I'm assuming that's where the money was. He would be the one to deposit the money in the bank. And he had 2 carloads of men who would stand with him on the sidewalk while he was doing this. They took the deposit of the money every Sunday as a very serious step that they had to take and do it with efficiency, and they needed to secure those funds. And so, again, that was the concern that we had. Flip it, move forward a number of years, it's all changed. And today, many institutions are talking not about robberies, but they're talking about active shooter, the active shooter who goes into a business, who goes into a school, who goes into a house of worship, armed, fully armed, and starts shooting people just randomly, just shooting them. People who worked on jobs who have been terminated or have just been let go and are angry and can't handle it emotionally and psychologically, they go out, secure a weapon, and come back and destroy that business and shoot many innocent people. Active shooter. Active shooters are a concern that we need to think about. So I went to Detective Larry Ellison, and I said, Larry, I just don't think that we're ready at Global Ministries Christian Church to thwart, to stop anybody from coming in with weapons and doing severe damage. And quite frankly, very few houses of worship, whether they be a mosque, with exception to the Nation of Islam, whether they be a mosque or whether they be a Roman Catholic church, a synagogue, a church fellowship, I do not know many that are actually ready to thwart, stop somebody from coming in with weapons. And so Larry said that he would work with me on it, and we are finally at a point now where we have had a conversation with the Boston Police Department, because they have a active shooters training that they will offer to businesses and educational institutions as long as people live in the city of Boston. They can be trained. And so we're actually now working out a date for the leadership of Global Ministries Christian Church to be trained. Now, I had 2 ideas, and I want to share those 2 ideas with you. And I'm trying to multitask while I'm talking. One idea was that we were going to invite the church leaders from around the city to come into Global Ministries Christian Church and have them sit in the training. But one person said this to me, that the trainers usually like to train people in their church because every church is different. Every exit door is different. Every security compromise is different. Where cameras are located, they're different. And so they felt that it'd be better that they go and train people in their respective churches. And that makes sense to me. Also, I want to share that I'm thinking that we should have the training for the members of Global Ministries Christian Church, and I understand why it should just be ours. But if there are any church leaders that would like, from other churches, that would like to come in and observe to see what we're doing, they are welcome to come in, and they are welcome to learn from our experience. And I think that might work, that we invite some pastors in just to observe so that they can say to themselves, make a decision, yes, I would like to have this training in my church. What other better way to help people to understand what the training is all about, whether it's really relevant to their experience? Now, most of us who have been to the Nation of Islam over the years know that they do have a security protocol, and that when you go into that church, when you go into that mosque, that they will scrutinize, they will check you out from head to toe. I remember the last time I was there, they actually went into my pocket and pulled out my pen. I had a writing pen, and they checked that to make sure that that was a pen. And I have never, in going to events, had people go into my pocket and pull out a pen to determine whether or not it was a weapon. So this security protocol is good. It's second to none. It's a protocol that all of us should have in our churches. I would say in some churches to their level of scrutiny, and in other churches maybe not so much. But I applaud the Nation of Islam for being ahead of the game on this protocol regarding active shooters. Let me run this. I want you to hear what this. I looked up a active shooters definition, and I wanted you to hear what I'm going to try to play right now. Just give a listen.
Active shooter safety resources. An active shooter is an individual actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill people in a populated area, and recent active shooter incidents have underscored the need for a coordinated response by law enforcement and others to save lives. The FBI is committed to working with its partners to protect schools, workplaces, houses of worship, transportation centers, other public gathering sites, and communities. Although local and state law enforcement agencies are virtually always the first ones on the scene, the FBI has played a large role in supporting the response to every major incident in recent years and has much to offer in terms of capacity, expertise, specialized capabilities, training, and resources before and after an incident occurs. The successful prevention of these active shooter incidents lies with a wide range of public and private entities all working together. To that end, the FBI provides operational, behaviorally based threat assessment and threat management services to help detect and prevent acts of targeted violence, helping academic, mental health, business, community, law enforcement, and government entities recognize and disrupt potential active shooters who may be on a trajectory toward violence. The Bureau also continues its research to identify indicators that could signal potential violent intent: run, hide, fight. These FBI training videos demonstrate the 3 tactics you can use to keep yourself and others safe during an active shooter attack: run, hide, and fight. Learning these principles now will prepare and empower you to put them into practice.
You know, the concern here is your safety the safety of the members of the church and the safety of visitors and guests. And the protocol, one of the protocols, and again, I want you to have this in your thinking, it's called run if you can, get out of there. Hide, if you can't run and get out of there, then hide. And then if you can't hide, the last thing you do is that you fight like you never fought before. The protocol is run, hide, and fight. Let me say it again. It's run, hide, and fight. And I've watched enough active shooter videos to know that everybody's training is different. But there are certain things that are very common for all of them. And the run, hide, and fight, that aspect of the demonstration, that aspect of protecting yourself is universal in most trainings that I have observed. Now, we have to think in terms of the church, the houses of worship, that when people go to a mosque and they go to a synagogue, they go to a church, they're not thinking in terms of, I may not make it out. They're not thinking about somebody might come into my house of worship and shoot it up. Remember the congressman who was a pastor, and he went to a prayer meeting with about 9 or 10 people in the meeting, and this was a black church, and a white gentleman came in, and they invited him to stay for the prayer meeting, and he ended up shooting a number of them and killing them, including the congressman. So, as a church, we're very welcoming, especially if somebody comes in and they seem to be inebriated, they seem to be strung out, they seem to be hurting. A lot of us just reach out to a person like that, not knowing whether or not that is a ploy, that is a tactic that they're using to disarm the church so that they can do the harm that they want to do. And so we haven't decided yet the date for the active shooters protocol. We are still working with the Boston Police on the specifics, but we are going to have it. It's about a month or a month and a half out, and we'll send information out to as many churches and pastors who may want to come and observe. Again, that's not their training, it's our training for our church, but we want to invite some pastors in so that they can look at it and say, this is something that my church needs, because this training is about 2 hours long. It's a long time. But I believe that most of the trainings that I have watched and observed, they have the trainer actually interacting with those in the audience. So it's just not a purely intellectual, straight, just communication, giving you information. It's overheads, it's slides, it's talking to people, it's engaging them, it's asking them questions so that the people, will stay engaged in the training, and the trainer can determine whether or not people are with him or her in the training that they're going to present to our churches. Now, just one more thing before I wanted us to look at this, but to listen to this run, hide, and fight strategy that hopefully would work if you needed it in your house of worship. Let's go to that right now and see or listen to what they're going to say about run, hide, and fight.
Hi, can I get you started with drinks?
617-282-0685 is the number where you can actually reach us this morning. We're not going to play this entire presentation, but we're going to play some of it because I think that it would help us to understand what needs to be done.
black shirt. Empty hands up, follow their instructions.
I'm in the direct line of fire if I head for either exit, but I have other options to help me survive. Guys, come on, in here. Come on. Go, go, go. Lock and barricade the door.
Both my exits are blocked by the shooter. I gotta stay hidden. I'm no victim. I'm ready for this.
He's applying direct pressure to the wound to stop the bleeding until we can find a tourniquet. In the meantime, turn off your phones and make a plan to defend yourself.
Run, hide, and fight. And I was just playing an excerpt from a video that had a active shooter come into a bar, start fighting with somebody, and then started shooting people. Again, this is something that we are taking seriously at Global Ministries Christian Church. And I would think that churches where the pastors might be more visible might be the church where a active shooter might want to go to that church and silence the pastor. I'm not talking about every church. I'm not saying that pastors are always the target. You just never know why a person would go to a particular church and why and who they will be shooting as a way of dealing with either their issues, their anger, targeting a specific person. You just never know. But if we're prepared, in our church at this point in time, we do not have any security cameras, and we're going to be talking about that after the training as to how many cameras, or what should be covered. Should the cameras be battery operated? Should they be connected to the electricity? There was just so many questions. And in addition to the cameras, being able to have the type of recording device that an active shooter couldn't find and destroy, because you want everything that's happening in your church on a Sunday or on a Saturday or during the weekday, you want everything covered by an activated camera. The worst thing in the world is to have somebody come into your mosque, into your temple, cause a lot of damage, and then you find out that your camera was not recording properly, and the evidence or data that you thought you had, guess what? You don't have it. Let's go to the phone. I believe we have a phone call. Caller, go ahead. You're live on the air.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I think this is absolutely necessary. The the reason the mosques and the synagogues have had to do this is, in their world, suicide bombing is acceptable.
Yeah.
It's only been recently that suicide by cop has become in the forefront, or in the nomenclature of the American society. So I think what you're saying is absolutely correct, but there'll be churches that I know that in my brother's church, there is a Glock 9 under the pulpit, and everybody knows it. Well, all the preachers know, but they're all trained. All the trainers have had firearm. All the pastors and the assistants have had firearm training. So in that particular church, they're, shall we say, prepared for the worst. But there's also other things. You get into the psychology of how you're going to defend as a pastor,
right?
How you're going to defend your people. Most of the time, in these active shooter situations when it comes to synagogues, the pastor is not the first person shot, but is ultimately one of the targets, unless it's a personal vendetta having to do with the pastor and somebody that he is wronged. So there's a lot of layers to this in terms of how do you defend your congregation and what are the practices, and you know, there are people out there that would not even go to a church if they know there's a firearm in the church.
So let's go back all the way back. Let's roll the tape all the way back to what you said about in your brother's church, that there's a firearm in the pulpit. And let's say that the active shooter comes in and starts doing what they're doing. Whose responsibility is it? Who's the trained person to grab that weapon and go to the defense of the congregation? I'm sure it's not the pastor.
Actually, it is the pastor. It is the pastor, and all of the deacons, all of the men in the church are certified, trained firearm people.
Do they carry their weapons to church on Sundays and Wednesdays and whenever they're there?
I can't answer that because I don't want that to be out, but suffice to say there are sufficient weapons. And when I was a member of a particular church in Boston, because of the nature of the church, there were armed people, sidearm people in the congregation during the service. Mm-hmm. People who were actively carrying their sidearms in plain view.
In Boston?
In the Boston area. Again, I'm not going to say what church it is, but it was the church that I was a member of for several years.
Right. Now, I could see law enforcement officers who attend a church. They usually carry their guns wherever they go, and they're ready.
Oh, yes.
Right? And I know of other people who are trained to shoot weapons, and they carry their guns. It's concealed. It's not visible to the public. But and as I said at the beginning of this, I used to see pastors deposit money at the banks with 10 people standing with them as they're depositing the money. And the only concern that the people had back then was the church just being robbed on Sunday after the offering was collected. Now it's expanded as to the possibility of people coming into the churches. Stay right there. We have another caller. Caller, go ahead. You're live on the air.
Hello, please. Good morning. This is Jamal calling.
Yes, sir.
So, as you know, the other day was the Mamleo anniversary, right?
Yes.
There was a young brother, I can't remember his name, who did the opening prayer.
Okay.
Right. He's a preacher, a reverend, a minister, whatever you want to call it, but he's also a cop.
Yes.
And so this is the thing of what I want to put into, Christians, preachers, cops, these are all regular people. Mm-hmm. So the assumption that nobody in a church knows what to do with a weapon is an erroneous one. Mm-hmm. I mean, you got people who was, doggone Vietnam veterans. Nowadays, you got Iraq and Afghanistan. Some of the younger guys in there are veterans. And, so I think that weapons and the knowledge of it is a lot more common than folks would think. And I know particularly down south, everybody's got
a weapon down south.
Firearms in the church down south are not news, are not surprising, and it just isn't. However, the mentality of the weapon being evil doesn't exist in that culture. Whereas up in the north, especially within Boston, there are people who would think you're a troglodyte if you understand how to use a firearm. So you become, there's a lot of victims up here because people have the idea that in their world this doesn't happen, and the bad people look for those kind of people because it turns them into, they're willing victims. So
Well,
Yeah, I think that the point is interesting about one, the young officer who is also a reverend himself, and then two, just how many, at Mamleo, like most of them people go to church. All
Right.
these officers
Right.
and whatnot go to church, and all these veterans in church. So I think that you almost need to do an inventory
yeah.
and find out amongst your crew who already knows what. Some may know weapons. In your case, once again, you got Scotty, as well, who knows martial arts and other hand-to-hand and other weapons, self-defense tactics. But you should take an inventory of who knows what, because I don't think that everybody is just as ignorant or oblivious of this world of weapons as people may think.
Well, if something happens in the church with an active shooter, one of the questions that I would have is if there's no training, if there's no strategy, if it's just left to one or two people on their own, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, people could be damaged. There's got to be some planning for something like this. I remember at my home church, 12th Baptist Church, we had a fire at the church, and it came from the basement, and it was coming up into the fellowship hall. And we were trained, never, if there's a fire, never open that door that leads downstairs when there's a fire. Because if you do, those flames are coming right into the hall, and then the next thing is they're going up into the balcony. We were trained, and we knew what to do. We knew where to go. And a lot of lives were saved that day because we were trained. But if you have a church and you have people who have weapons, they've used them, as you say, in the armed services or the police officers, et cetera, but nobody's worked on a plan, some people could end up dead because everybody could be so alarmed that everybody's going in their own direction. Is that true? Not true?
That's absolutely true. Training is the friend. You always, and again, this is a responsibility of pastors and leaders to train their folk that we are living in a world where at any point in time anything can happen, and to see something, say something. One of the churches that I visit, and in our church, when you come as a visitor, somebody will come and sit next to you to help guide you through the service, and while they're guiding you through the service, they're also trained to pay attention to your actions, your body language, and what's going on within you, engage you in conversation to see if, it's not profiling, but it is paying attention.
Well,
a lot of
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, I was going. Jamal, why is the nation better prepared than the average church for this?
I mean, to be quite frank, is because they put time and effort into it.
Right.
and due to some of the attacks and scrutiny that they were under from via the government as well as other black organizations, multiple assassination attempts and infiltration attempts over the years with everybody from Elijah Muhammad up to right now, Minister Farrakhan is still receiving death threats and plots and all this type of thing. So they had a higher level of vigilance, but they also took it serious. So they put time and effort into training their men on security, on martial arts, and they used a lot of their inventory. The brothers there who have been in the military and all these other things that I talked about, they became the trainers. The martial artists became the trainers of that. So on and so forth. And it's more of a paramilitary organization as well as religious or spiritual. The black church, however, despite the legacy of lynchings down south and everything, has really never, only in a couple of instances, for some who in the history may know about the Deacons for Defense.
Yeah. Oh.
So the Deacons for Defense were a group of brothers from a church down south who were all military veterans of that time. I forget what war they came out of, but it was one of the early ones, and the Klan was terrorizing the town, and they had just got back from war, and they was just like, not today. Okay, right. So they got themselves together. They were all deacons in the church. They armed themselves, and they ran them crazy ball heads out of the town, And it's a good story. Like Forrest Whitaker's in it and all that. You should look up that movie, Deacons for Defense. But that's one example of a church that got more, I will say, more in tune with the black radical and the black revolutionary spirit that was going on. And that's what I would like to say to this point. I don't really care if you're a church or not. Any black people who were doing anything, organizing. I remember I had this conversation with Ayanna Presley when she first became a city councilor.
Jamal, Jamal, keep talking. I have to go answer the door. You guys keep this going till I get back. Go ahead.
Easy.
Not a problem.
Right. So Ayanna Presley at that time was just a young city councilor. She, was not engaged or married to her husband now, Conan. And when I used to talk to her, that was my number one concern. Ayanna, sister, you're a beautiful woman who's out here, a young woman. You're alone most of the time. You're not driving. What is your security protocol? How are you getting to and from all of these meetings with these nut folks out here? So whether you're a church, whether you're an individual, whether you're an organization, if you're meeting at the library, if you're meeting at the ABCD building, you should have a security mindset anywhere about your surroundings. Myself, as a former New Black Panther, anytime we did an event, we checked every entrance and exit. We checked windows, back stairwells, all of this type of thing, bathrooms, trash cans, so that we had an understanding of wherever we were going to be holding our event. So, the first step for security is really a knowledge of your surroundings, being aware, knowing the buildings that you're in, and having a sense of personal security.
And you're absolutely right when it comes to that. You have to prepare. One of the things that we were never trained, even within the church, in the old school, churches were never trained to take to have security teams. The churches that I belong to, we put together security teams just because not everybody that comes into a church is saved or has the right heart. You have to look at, you don't reinvent the wheel. You have to look at what's been out there and what's happened to know how to protect. The church, one of the churches that I attended, where everybody or a lot of people were armed, carrying sidearms in the congregation, including the pastor of the church, sidearm on his hip, preaching the word of God. Why? Because not everybody who came into that society, some people were there because they wanted to hear the word of God, and some people were there because they were against the word of God and wanted to stand up and do what they were going to try to do. And the pastor would say, "No, not here. We are armed for your protection." It's just that simple.
Well, let me ask you this question: what do you think that the black church, that members of the black church, would allow people to frisk them the way that they frisk people when they go into the Nation of Islam, into their mosque? Do you think that church folk
I can tell you point blank, the answer is no. The answer is no.
And I can tell you from my experience in some of these churches, some of them might like it.
Yeah.
Jamal.
Some of them might like it. Well, I'm not going to go there, but in a lot of situations, see, here's the thing. You need to be trained and pay attention. And like I say, body language and a close personal contact. There are things that you can do. If you look at how the Israelis protect their airport, and because that the Israelis are just they have one of the best security systems there are. When all these planes were being hijacked everywhere else, the Israeli planes were not being touched. Why? Because of the protocols that they have in place that pay attention to simple things. Body language, not wanting to look somebody in the eye. How are they moving? Are they excessively sweating? Are they wearing clothes that are inappropriate for the time? Because they may be hiding a weapon underneath it. There's a lot of things that you can do and pay attention to. But the first thing starts with not being a victim. You have to have a mindset that you are not going to be a victim.
Well, Pastor Wall, let me interject this to that point, that I was making as a joke, and it's really not a joke. And I brought this up before.
Uh-huh.
the thing is that we could prepare for a scenario, okay, like that is has a very minuscule probability of happening. Okay, so luckily we really haven't had outbursts of violence in the black church, particularly in Boston, with the exception of what everybody talks about what happened all them years ago in Borders Church,
right.
And that was because of the rival people involved. It wasn't like anybody was coming to actually do harm to the church or coming after Borders, right?
Yes.
So with things like that, I think yes, it's good for you to have a safety plan in general, but I think as Christians, men of God, that you all really need to look into an overall thing of holistic safety. Because while the gun thing doesn't happen often, what does unfortunately happen often in church is safety is violated in other ways.
The abuse.
To my point about,
Right, the sexual abuse. Yeah.
Yes, and dysfunction.
Yeah.
So that to me, it would be unfair to do violence without what we call and what we now know is also sexual violence.
Jamal, be assured that in this training, I'm not just looking at the active shooter, but when we talk about where the cameras can go, children should not be going to the bathroom all by themselves. That all of that is also in the back of my mind. So it's going to be multifaceted as I listen to this training, because you're right. The protection, there's more of a chance of somebody being sexually abused in the church than there is having an active shooter coming in the city that I live in.
Unfortunately, not just sexually, but mentally. There are some people in positions within the church. It's their only position of power in their entire life, and they wield it as if, it's their own little kingdom. And those type of attitudes, I've seen those type of attitudes within the usher board, demanding that somebody sit here, or all those type of things. So I think Brother Jamal is correct that the approach needs to be holistic. From the point of view that we have to go ahead.
And of course, another problem is, as well as you and I both know over the years, there are also women in the church, good sisters that we know, and then you find out, wow, this woman was being abused all this time. That's why she didn't show up that Sunday for Sunday school.
Right.
She was putting meat on her eye or something like that. So there's also the physical abuse of domestic violence. All of this needs to be addressed in the church. But I just want to tell you, Pastor Wall, here's the problem with you. The problem with you is that you're most willing to do these things because you're not the problem, right? So it's easy for you to be open to these things, right? It's easy for you to say, hey, we could do this because you're not the problem. The real problem is in Boston, could we get all of these black churches and all of these if we could get 20 of the prominent preachers in Boston, all the ones who were always in the newspaper, the ones who were always pointing their moral finger at the community, telling us pull up our pants, stand up straight, look at you with your kids and everything else, those folks, could we get a commitment from them for this holistic safety plan? We know that Bruce Wall is not down with none of this, shenanigans, right? But can we get a commitment from everybody, the 10-point coalition, BMA 10-point, whatever it's called right now, and the major preachers in Boston, Dickerson, Borders, Groover, Bardrick, Rivers, let's throw him in there too. Let me think of some others. Hammond, you name it. Let's go down the list. But that's my point. It's not just about Bruce Wall, because you're easy. You're the easy sell. We have to convince, this should be a chorus of black churches, and this should be the one thing that everybody can agree on without any personality or ego. Everybody should agree that we want the people who go to church and the communities to be safe, including safe from gun violence, physical abuse, sexual abuse. We want holistic healthiness and safety. Yeah?
Right. And in thinking this entire thing through, originally I was going to ask all the churches that wanted to participate to come here. We'll go through the training together. But what was expressed to me, which I understand, that the training needs to be in your church, because every church is different, every exit door, where cameras need to be located. So they were saying that it's better that we go to each church and do the training there. Although I'm still going to send out an invitation to pastors if they want to come and see the training themselves, and then hopefully that will sell them on wanting to have it in their respective churches, that they're invited to come and be a part of it. I hope they'll respond.
I think that what Jamal is saying is the churches really need to be what they say they are, which is a house of God, caring about the people of God for the benefit of uplifting God. And the unfortunate problem is that he's not wrong. I wish I could tell him that he's off his rocker and this, but he's not wrong in this situation. Because that you are not the problem, I don't believe I'm the problem. There are other pastors out there who are not the problem, but there are pastors out there who are exactly the problem. They are part of they give license to comments that Jamal is making because of their activity, because of their moral or their own personal picadillos that have gotten into the pulpit or tolerated within the house of God. So these issues become forefront, they become center. Clearly, even if it's 1% of the pastors out there, it's 1% too many. And then once you start training, what if you have a pastor who believes that women are to be subject to the men in every and all situation? So now that the women that are in that under his charge, under his care, could be women that are being abused in their home, but it's not a problem because the man has dominion. So there's all these other type of things that he has brought up, and he's not wrong. I mean, he go ahead.
Oh, and see, and it's because it's clearly it's not all preachers or whatever, but so it's not so much the sin of the one or the few, but it's the silence of the many. So as men of God, it's just the reluctance to have that conversation is what's just so mind-boggling to me, and particularly while demanding tough conversations of the community in general. But then it's like, why is everybody, grown men, fathers, grandfathers and stuff, why is everybody so scared of this overall conversation? It makes no sense. Pastor Ward, to your thing about the trainings, let me just tell you this. There are some things, though, that are pretty, like the basic stuff that you guys could do together, and then, yes, break off into individual churches. So even let's take the safety component further. I know that some people on the diaconate board or whatever may be trained in CPR. I don't know how many people are trained in CPR. Mm-hmm. But, everybody in the church should be, trained in CPR, as many as you can get, right? Yeah. So those are the types of things where you could do a training with everybody in one location. Even if it's too big, for your church or you need more space, maybe all y'all get together at the Reggie Lewis or RCC, whatever it is, who knows? But there are some basic safety things that all of y'all could do together. But yes, to tailor make a thing for each individual church, yes, it should be in the church. And I'll give you this as a funny thing. Both of us, 12th Baptist Church. Mm-hmm. So, most of us kids, we sat up in the balcony, right?
Yeah.
And as you know, because you used to talk about the store down the street, the one that was, doing some funky things, right? Yeah. But they also sold good candy, as did Mr. Walker. Mm-hmm. But they sold good candy, and they had the video games in the store. Okay. Right? Donkey Kong and Pac-Man, okay? So sometimes we'd be up in the balcony, and I could tell when Reverend Haynes was getting ready to go on a tear. Because he started quoting Hebrew and Greek and stuff, right? And then this would be a good time to exit the Haynes left. So right there from the balcony, as you know, was that exit to the fire escape.
Okay.
Okay? So people like me... And
you guys went down the fire escape?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So, and this is what's funny about it, because as kids, we knew every entrance and exit to that doggone building and the MLK house and the Sam house. Mm-hmm. So oftentimes, sometimes in your building, you should talk to some of these kids. Mm-hmm. They know all the doors.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and also but keep in mind now that there is I know that I have too many stories of people, even within my family, who attended church, women with their pistol in their purse. I know that at least one of my sisters attends church every Sunday, and her pistol is in her purse. It was handed down in our family, and some of the women go with their pistols in their purse. So there are almost always firearms in a church that people don't know are there.
Okay, let's go right there. Suppose the active shooter comes in and starts shooting. So sister girl, okay, pulls out the gun that's in her purse. She has it, but she's not trained to use it. And she starts, they start just shooting, and they are not able to hit the target. Is that a danger when people just
Of course it's a danger. It's anytime you have something you don't understand, you're a danger, whatever that is.
So
if you don't understand the word of God and you're quoting it, you're a danger.
So how do we handle something like that where people, I'm bringing my weapon to church?
You handle it by, you just say point blank. If you're carrying a piece and you know who you are, and you're not trained, we admonish you to get trained or stop carrying your piece in the house of God. Because we want you to be if you're going to be the solution, don't be the problem. And I think, again, go ahead.
I was just going to say, in Massachusetts, there's the basic firearm safety course, right?
Yeah.
That costs $150.
Okay.
Right, or at least it did when I took it. So $150. There's several even black-owned trainers locally. I know at one point there was some retired cops who had one called Mag Pro. That's where I got mine. They give you all the trainings about firearm safety with both revolvers and automatic pistols. You want to get a training with the live fire where you're actually shooting the gun.
Yeah.
And then after that, it's going to be up to you to maintain your training. I would recommend anybody who has a gun that's, legally allowed to have one should get one. And then you got to go to your local, chief of police. It's tougher in Boston. It's easier if you live in a suburb.
Yeah.
Boston doesn't really like to give them out too much, but then you got to get a license signed off on by your local chief of police, and you get your license. And then you gotta go to the range because like anything, like driving. Think about when you first learned to drive, and now what you're doing now. You have to keep at it and practice it till you can get proficient and safe.
Yeah, all the trainings that Jamal mentioned and then when you add to that the martial art training, we used to train. I trained all of my black belts in live fire defense techniques against firearms. We had instructors who came in and taught us the firearms, and then we learned how to defend with live fire. And it's a whole lot different when you're behind, quote unquote, is on the line than a rubber gun or something like that. We trained all the rubber gun techniques, and then you discover when it's a live fire situation, no. Well, that's not going to work. That's Hollywood.
Well, we're going to have to end this. Let me make this one statement. We have about 10 senior citizens in our church, and one of them has gone to Richard Scott, Sensei, and asked him to put together a defense course for the seniors. So Scotty has consented, and guess who's going to be one of the seniors in the class?
Well, it's going to be you.
I'm shocked, Jamal, that I've reached that point where I'm going to be hanging out with the seniors. Wow.
Well, it had to happen.
Well, like I told you, somebody in your congregation played a joke on you a long time, because when I pull in, it says senior pastor.
That's good. That's good. Jamal, that is good. Jamal, let's go do some stand-up comedy somewhere.
Oh, yeah, I'm down.
Guys, thanks for calling in. I appreciate it.
Have a good one.
Okay.
Yep.
Bye-bye, Pastor. Bye-bye. You've been listening to Morning Inspiration, and we have been talking about active shooters, and we're going to continue to talk about this. We'll talk about it once we undergo the training so that people can at least hear what it was like. I don't know if they're going to allow me to film any of it, but I'm looking forward to the training for members and leaders of the church. Coming up in a few moments will be, who's coming up in a few moments? The three young men with Randy Neighbors, Pastor Randy Neighbors, Pastor, what's his name from North, where's he at? Stephen Davis from New Jersey, and myself. We'll be back in a few moments, so stay there. Do not go anywhere. We're coming right back.
It's wonderful.